I just found canon proof of how all the Pokémon regions are connected. On Pokémon Day 2025, the Japanese Pokémon YouTube channel released a 13-minute animation called Dragonite and the Special Delivery. It hasn't been translated into English at all, but it actually contains huge revelations about the Pokémon World. In the animation, Hana, who works for the Paldea Postal Service, needs to deliver a letter from a boy called Rio from Paldea to Kanto in only one evening. Hana and Rio receive help from the ace mail carrier Dragonite, who takes them on a journey through multiple regions. So, using Dragonite's route and existing canon information, we can draw a map of all 9 core series regions of the Pokémon world. We have never seen an animation like this before, and even if Pokémon has never been very consistent with its lore, I don't believe the Pokémon Company would let the animation studio just make up everything with no oversight. It must be based on at least something. So, I will show you what I believe is the most canon world map we have ever had. Before we start, let's set some ground rules. The Pokémon world has been compared to our world quite many times, even referencing specific countries and such, so it's probably safe to say that the Earth in the Pokémon world is quite similar to ours, with its size, the sun, time zones, and other laws of nature being the same as ours. We can also hopefully trust that all official Pokémon maps have been drawn in a sensible way, with North being at the top, and the proof in the animation does support this quite nicely. Lastly, while I would like to assume that as an expert postman Dragonite chooses the fastest route possible, actually we'll quickly see that this just can't be true. So instead, my premise is going to be that since Dragonite is so fast, it can afford to show Hana and Rio a bit of a scenic route, plus staying close to land when possible allows for safe landing spots should anything dangerous happen. With these out of the way, let's go deliver that letter. Our mission starts in Porto Marinada on the west coast of Paldea. It's sunset, and Dragonite heads out directly towards the sun. So, it's immediately clear we're going west. I'd like to question what Kyogre is doing in Paldea, but it's basically the god of the seas, so I guess it can hang out in whichever ocean it wants. Anyway, we're heading west, flying straight across the ocean, and the first region we reach is Galar. Dragonite flies over Windon Stadium and past Rose Tower, indicating it was coming from the east or possibly northeast. So, our first big revelation is that even though Paldea is based mainly on Spain, it seems to be located more like where our Nordic countries are. I really can't think of any other explanation. Even if the animation just doesn't show Dragonite turning, it would make absolutely no sense for it to make a loop like this. So we have to assume Paldea is up here instead. Next, the direction changes, and we can clearly see Hammerlock as well as Motostoke a bit further ahead. What's noteworthy here is that while we don't see the sun in this image, the sea on the right is clearly better lit than on the left, which confirms that west is that way. So, Dragonite is not flying west anymore, but has instead turned south. Also, it's not quite sunset anymore, but rather just evening, which further supports the idea that Dragonite has moved west by at least one time zone. Next, the video skips to Kalos and Lumiose City, as we can see Prism Tower right in front of us. But what's interesting is that we can see Pokémon League on the right, and the mountain range and Dendemil Town's windmill on the left. Also, judging by the shadows, the sun is now behind us on the right, so while we don't know the exact time of the day, it's probably afternoon or early evening, so the sun will still be west-ish. So first of all, we have again moved some time zones to the west, plus Dragonite is still not flying in a straight line but has instead turned again. So now our map suddenly looks like this. Even if we try to keep everything as close together as possible, Kalos must be southwest of Paldea and Galar. It doesn't quite explain why we're coming from the west here, but it could be chalked up to Dragonite wanting to make a small scenic detour. Next, Dragonite messes with our sense of direction by circling around Prism Tower, so we actually don't see where we're headed next, but it doesn't really make sense that it would keep going east between Dendemil and Pokémon League, so more likely it at least eventually turns south again. This is where things start getting messier, because next we see a mountain range and a herd of Zebstrika? Could we really be in Unova? When Gen 5 was released, we found out that Unova is far away from all the previous regions, and from Scarlet and Violet we know it's so far from Paldea that you have to travel to Blueberry Academy by plane. But could we be somewhere else? For a while I had a wild idea that this could be Mount Molto, an anime-exclusive volcano from Gen 6 that's supposed to be located between Dendemil Town and Anistar City, so interpreting the Kalos map liberally, we'd be somewhere around here. And while Zebstrika isn't native to Kalos, we could argue that this area just hasn't been documented properly since we're sort of between regions right now. However, this volcano looks nothing like Mount Molto, and the Zebstrika theory really isn't that plausible. The only other place Zebstrika can be found is some of the Mirage Islands and Mirage Mountains in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, so I guess this could be Mount Chimney, but claiming we're suddenly in Hoenn, that we know is located closer to Kanto and Johto, feels like a massive stretch. Besides, there is actually a more plausible option, because Unova does have its own volcano in the middle of a mountain range, Reversal Mountain. And while it's a dormant volcano in Black 2, in White 2 it's actually active and could very well look something like this. Suddenly, it seems very likely that we're in Unova, and since the amount of daylight hasn't really changed, that would place the region somewhere south of Kalos. Our map is really starting to take shape. I should mention that it doesn't match at all with the globe we see in the black and white seasons of the anime that seems to put Unova more where New York would be. But what can I say, Pokémon has never been very consistent with, well, anything. Okay, what? Suddenly it's snowy, there's a Frostlass, and the next thing we see is a mountaintop above the clouds. This points very clearly to Sinnoh, especially since none of the remaining regions have locations that would fit, so we probably skipped over quite a lot of travel here. As for how far from Unova we might be, I do have some ideas. We know that the first 4 regions are based on different parts of Japan, with Sinnoh being based on Hokkaido. And because we know Sinjo ruins are located north of Johto and somewhere between Johto and Sinnoh, that further supports that the regions are located approximately where they are on the real map of Japan. We also know from the anime that it is possible to travel from Unova to Kanto by a ship through the Decolor Islands, which means there can't be any large continents between the two. And it could also give us a vague estimate of the distance. This is where my research really went on a tangent, and I actually skimmed through the entire Decolor Island season of the anime, writing down each day of the travel, how long they spent on each island, and how much time is actually spent sailing. In most episodes, we arrive at the port sometime after breakfast and leave at sunset, so we can say they're probably spending somewhere between 10 and 15 hours sailing each night. Of course, we need to make some pretty big assumptions and vague estimations here, considering we don't know when exactly sunrise and sunsets are, which time zones we're in, or even what time of the year it is, and the islands probably aren't located in an exact straight line. In any case, if we assume the anime doesn't skip any days of uneventful sailing and actually shows us every single day of the journey, the trip takes at least 31 days, out of which at least 15 nights and 2 days are spent aboard the ships. Assuming a normal cruise ship speed of 18 to 24 knots, which is roughly 30 to 45 kilometers per hour or 21 to 28 miles per hour, the characters could realistically travel anywhere between 5,000 to 11,000 kilometers. And since the distance from the coast of France to New York is just about 5,300 kilometers, it's actually very plausible that the characters basically crossed the Atlantic. So, as a result of this very long sidetrack, I'm placing all the Japanese regions approximately where the east coast of North America would be. Okay, back to Dragonite. So, we're in Sinnoh, above Mount Coronet. This is where I just have to ignore some of the details in the video because this is simply not how light works. We first fly straight towards the sun, but when we look down, the mountain still has light and shadowy sides. How does that make sense? Please, animators, that's not how shadows work. I'm trying to do scientific research here. Anyway, since we know Kanto is somewhere south of Sinnoh, and Dragonite is coming from the snowy areas in the north, I'm just going to say that when Dragonite drops down from the clouds, we have crossed Sinnoh and are going south. And if we assume Sinnoh is located where Hokkaido is, you do need to cross some ocean to get to the mainland, so it makes sense. The last trek of the journey is a long flight across the ocean. Latios and Latias aren't particularly suspicious since they can fly anywhere they want, but when we start seeing some water Pokémon, it's noteworthy that we're only seeing Pokémon from the first 4 generations, plus Alola. This feels very deliberate and suggests that while the other regions from Generation 5 onwards seem to be close together, Alola might actually be closer to the Japanese regions. We don't get a lot of information here, but since it's a warm, most likely southern region, and its Pokémon population could reach pretty far from the actual islands, I would place it somewhere around here, which is actually quite close to how Japan and Hawaii really are located. Finally, we see the coast of Kanto, though the coastline is surprisingly unremarkable. We don't see the mountain behind Indigo Plateau that should be quite noticeable, or the volcano on Cinnabar Island, or any islands or beaches. Hana does say something along the lines of "there it is," confirming this is indeed Kanto and they're not arriving from the side of Johto or anything. So it's most likely that we're arriving from either northeast or southeast that seem to have the most even coastlines. When combined with the potential location of Alola in the south, I would say Dragonite does a bit of a scenic loop somewhere around here and arrives to Kanto from the southeast. Now that we're almost done, I think we need to double check our timeline here. If we put our whole journey on the real-world map, Dragonite travels about 12,000 kilometers, and we know from multiple Pokédex entries that Dragonite can circle the globe in 16 hours. If we assume the Earth in the Pokémon world is the same size as ours, its circumference is 40,075 kilometers, or 24,901 miles. This makes Dragonite's speed a staggering 2,500 kilometers per hour, or about 1,553 miles per hour, which puts it in the same speed category with some of the world's fastest jet planes. This means that at top speed, the whole flight would take Dragonite less than 5 hours, and even if we assume the regions are a bit closer together and Dragonite can take a couple of extra hours for the trip, we're still most likely traveling faster than normal commercial planes. In any case, compared to the real-world map, the journey spans about 7 time zones. So if we say the sunset in Puerto Marinada is at 8 PM, for example, this would mean that at the same time it's 1 PM in Kanto, and after a 5-hour journey, Dragonite would arrive there at around 6 PM. Judging by the amount of daylight and long shadows, and the fact that the research lab could very well be finishing their workday around that time, I think this checks out. I feel like I should say something about Hana and Rio only wearing helmets as protective gear while flying at the speed of a plane, and Hana isn't even using her goggles, but considering people in the Pokémon world survive flamethrowers and thunderbolts on a regular basis, maybe we can just overlook that part. So, we finally arrive at the laboratory where Rio's dad is working, and the last theory I have is where this lab is located. It doesn't look like either Professor Oak's or Professor Cerise's laboratory, and both of them also work with a couple of assistants at most, while this place seems to have at least 14 people working there. We also don't know of any locations with an indoor yard like this one. I was almost willing to just accept this is some unknown laboratory created just for this animation, but then I realized that this room is remarkably similar to this room in Pokémon Laboratory on Cinnabar Island. Also, the view we see from the windows could be some nearby islands, since most of Cinnabar is pretty close to sea level. It's not an exact match, but the locations of the machines and other furniture are so close that it's definitely my best guess. This would also imply that the animation is set around the time of Generation 1 games, because from Gen 2 onwards the whole island is destroyed by the erupting volcano. And there we have it, the entire map of the main Pokémon regions according to the evidence Dragonite gave us, and the route it took to travel through multiple regions all the way from Paldea to Kanto. Do you agree with my conclusions? Did I miss something? Or do you think overanalyzing a 13-minute piece of animation doesn't make any sense? Either way, let me know in the comments. I had so much fun putting this together, and I'd love to know if there's more canon information out there that I don't know about. And if you like either Dragonite or some Pokemon-related travel in the real world, check out this video about Pokemon trains in Japan while I work on my next research topic.